Let's get on to the second function before this is a million minutes long. This is called the creative function or the auxiliary function. The auxiliary function supports the dominant function. The second function supports the first function. It is always the dominant function's counterpart in judgment or perception, as the case may be, and also with introversion and extroversion. So for the INTP, that means the auxiliary function will be a perception function, not judgment, like thinking is judgment, right? And it will be extroverted, not introverted, because introverted thinking is, well, introverted. So like the dominant function, extroverted intuition, or the creative function in general for all types, is relatively well developed. It's not our strongest, however, necessarily. If it was our strongest, it would be our dominant, and we would be a different type. Jung didn't develop clearly because of either time or interest in the book Psychological Types, the deep character of the auxiliary or the tertiary functions, the second or the third functions in that book. So most of that work was done later by post-Jungians. But he did talk about the inferior pretty clearly because that dominant-inferior relationship, that causal relationship, is much more apparent anyway. It's hard for me to imagine any manifestation of pure introversion without extroversion or getting anything out of extroversion without introversion. So I think that these two functions, 1 and 2, really do support each other in a very important way. There's a lot of debate on the actual dynamics of the way the functions operate. There are lots of models. I personally think that it's an interdependent relationship, that you can't be extroverted and introverted at the same time. You can't judge and perceive at the same time. You can't think and feel at the same time. One crowds out the other. That's my personal view. Some people think it's a matter of frequency. You use one more often than the other. Feel free to form your own opinion. Narrowing in more on extroverted intuition. It's the second function of the INTP, as we said before, the AUX function, as well as the INFP type. So both INTPs and INFPs have extroverted intuition in that second slot. It may seem, as kind of like what I was saying before about introverted thinking and the dominant function, that the extroverted intuition dominant types are worse with their NE because their intuition is actually stronger, kind of counterintuitively. They're more empirical, they're more event-driven, they have less control over it. We have our control over our extroverted intuition, much in the way that I was describing the ESTP and ENTPs using introverted thinking as an instrument or a tool. INFPs and INTPs use extroverted intuition as a tool. We can generate hypothetical scenarios or experimental scenarios that can test or prove some notion that's coming from our dominant function. The extroverted intuition is being checked to some degree by the lower functions, but it mostly is being used as a testing ground. How do you know your introverted thinking is right? Well, you check against the extroverted perception world. That's the dynamic that's going on with the INTP, and to some extent the INFP. ISTPs do it differently with sensory reality. I don't want to get too abstract. It checks the dominant TI against the world and also builds a picture of the time, the zeitgeist, and the context in which things operate. Context is very important to extroverted intuition. It tends to communicate in analogies more than metaphors. Metaphors I see coming more out of introverted intuition. These, again, are just general stereotypes. If you're looking for or trying to identify ideas, and if they're being formed by one function or another, that might be something you want to look for. The intuitive process of the INTP is pointed at the world, unlike the introverted intuitive types, and the potential will outweigh the actual, like all intuitive types, whether you're talking about NP or NJ, NJ being the introverted intuitive type, and the NP being the extroverted intuitive type users. It's more realistic extroverted intuition than introverted thinking. And to reiterate our primary motive, checking the veracity of our theories, these theories that are generated by the pure reasoning of TI. There's kind of two ways of doing it. You can either research, you can look at the world in a sort of passive way and see, does this conform with my thinking? Or you can contrive a scenario. You can create an experiment. You can generate, with sort of an ulterior motive, a scene that will hopefully show you if you're right or wrong, and if it fails, you can go back to the drawing board. But it's an instrument, it's a tool. when we're talking about the auxiliary position. The third position, we're around the bend now, halfway through, is the relief function or the tertiary function.